Good morning. My name is Richard Granite. I'm director of the Center for Law Practice Technology. And I'm here this morning with Raj Abhyanker as part of a series of interviews that we're doing on lawyers as entrepreneurs. We wanted to talk to Raj this morning about some of his activities, how he got into basically becoming a serial entrepreneur from his very young days, and see what kind of lessons we could learn from your experience. So tell me first, what was the first entrepreneurial experience you had, even before you became a lawyer? Do you remember what that was? I'm sure you do.
Yeah,
right?
so it was 3 years, when I was 3 years old. And I went to my uncle, he had a little pharmacy. So when I was 3, I used to go work in his pharmacy and just sitting there. I was just only a 3-year-old toddler. I was mostly just sitting there and helping people, watching my uncle deal with people in this kind of, street side pharmacy. And it was, I was just a little baby, and people used to walk in, and I would just be looking at the magnifying glass, mostly observing my uncle. And this is not a pharmacy like Walgreens, mind you. This is like a tin shed. They call it a chemist store. And basically I did that. So then I came back to America, and my father put us to work right away.
Right. Did you work with your dad in your dad's business?
Yeah, my father, he started a Rolodex sorting service.
Really?
So he wanted to, at the time in the late 70s, early 1980, people needed to get Rolodexes organized.
Right.
And so they would just have one Rolodex. So my father, he had bought one Apple II, and with a tape drive, and he had me and my sister brought back to basically sort and type Rolodexes. So we sorted and typed Rolodexes every day. So after school, we were the free child labor to sort Rolodexes, basically type them into AppleWorks and get them printed out on our Scribe printer, and then stick them on Rolodexes till 9 p.m. at night. So I learned how to type when I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And my sister and I always did that for every day.
It's probably one of the most important skills you learned, was to learn how to type when you were young.
Right, yeah, and it was, he charged like $100 for 1,000 Rolodexes.
Wow.
And then he'd go to all the Indian American families around Phoenix, and he'd ask them, do you have Rolodex? Everyone had a Rolodex. And do you need a Rolodex at work and at home? Do you have it sorted? It's all messed up. Fine, give it to us. We'll create 4 Rolodex sets for you, and we'll charge you, this much money. And so me and my sister just sat there, and we'd charge for updates. And so we had this one computer, and we'd take turns typing Rolodexes.
Did you do anything in high school?
Yeah, I did a lot of stuff in high school. So that Rolodex business became a computer business because we basically, people started asking us to buy the computers in like 1981. And so my father, he would go with us on the weekends to LA. It's Apple dealerships in the whole state of Arizona. And we'd buy Apple IIs and come back and then sell them to the families that we were doing Rolodexes for. Because they'd be like, how can I get my kid to learn how to type, right? And then so I was like the salesperson that I'd have to go train people at their homes. So I'd go to people's homes on Saturdays and train them how to use their new $6,000 Apple II.
That's interesting.
And then my father started the Arizona Apple Users Group in Arizona. He was granted the first authorized dealership in Arizona for Apple, and he was the president of it. So there's other people that were kind of in this homebrewed club, and the kids would learn programming. So I started learning programming when I was like 6 years old, five and a half years old, with this homebrew computer club.
This is great.
AZ Apple Computer Club.
This is a great story.
So I did that, and got to meet Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak when I was just a little kid. But they weren't famous at all, right? They were just like these
in the you're talking about the 80s now, right?
And they would go around the country to these homebrew computer clubs, enthusiasts, and these hobbyist type places. And my father he introduced Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
That's an amazing story.
And somewhere at our house in Phoenix, I have this picture, but it's been lost among the ages.
For you and Steve Jobs, that's great. Did you work your way through college? Pretty much?
Yeah, I worked my way through college. So
in law school?
Through grade school and through college. So through grade school, after school, like most kids, I had to go work in our store. We created a computer store. So I used to go to the computer store, first just empty the trash and then vacuum clean and do my homework in the back room. and then later on started fixing computers. So I would start, watching the technicians do RAM upgrades and, and do different kinds of things. And then later hard drives came out. So I started doing these memory upgrades and fixing computers. So did that, became an Apple authorized tech at 11 years old.
Wow.
So.
And then you became a lawyer eventually.
Yeah, so I grew up doing that. I felt throughout high school that's all I was going to do. So my father didn't really stress education for me.
Right.
So he basically told me, whenever, and especially when I was high school, our business was doing much better. For a while, I actually thought I would want to do well in school, so I started studying. But if I studied too much after school, you'd be like, you need to get to work. Stop studying. That's a waste of time. You got this.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
So I kind of got discouraged in many ways. But at the same time, I learned so many life skills, and I think when I graduated high school, I was already kind of building my own circuits and fixing computers. So
do you think entrepreneuring is kind of in your DNA, or is it a learned behavior?
Yeah, it's in my DNA because the reality is when I graduated high school, it was 1993. The web was just coming out.
Right.
Mosaic was just out, and then Netscape hadn't come out. So I started hacking that. So when I went to Arizona State, the first thing, before the web, we used to use bulletin boards. We used to use CompuServe, Prodigy, and all these bulletin boards to post computers for sale. So my dad's business would advertise computers for sale, and we'd take orders over the phone because there's no e-commerce. So people would call us, and we'd send these catalogs. We'd mail these catalogs all over the country.
Amazing.
So I used to make these catalogs, staple them with my sister, take them to the post office. So I grew up working. I mean, I have like a lifetime of working experience.
This is great.
Which is good and it's bad. I think it's bad psychologically. It's good, from a business perspective. It's
good because it trained you, basically, and these skills that really stay with you for your whole life.
Yeah. So then in college, I started playing around with the web. Started making my own Perl and CGI scripts. I basically started creating. First thing I did is took the Arizona State directory. I wanted a way to sell computers to these students, and email was just starting to come out. People had Telnet and bulletin boards, but email, and Arizona State gave everyone its email in 1993. So I found a way to get the directory of all the students in 1993. I scraped all that information, but being stupid and not as smart as I should have been, I didn't start Facebook. Instead, we wanted to email blast everyone.
Right, no, I get it. You're right. You missed that opportunity, right? You missed that opportunity.
Right. And so what I decided to do then is I thought I would create, no one knew, there's no search engines. So we decided, me and a couple buddies that were engineering students decided to create AOLclassifieds.com. So my first business when I was 19 years old, was AOLclassifieds.com.
Right.
And it was like 1994. This is before there was anything that was a search engine to find websites. So you had to know the URL to get to the site. So people were trying to get things that people knew in other places on the web. So I figured AOLclassifieds.com is a good name because people used AOL Classifieds and it was really popular for selling computers. So me and a couple buddies, we coded up what is a free version of AOLclassifieds.com. Then in like 95, we got a cease and desist letter from AOL.
Because you were using AOL's name, right?
In AOL's name. And AOL didn't want anything to do with the web. They said this web thing is they thought it was a threat to the AOL dial-up service. So they sent this scary letter, and I remember getting that. I didn't know
you were 18 years old, right?
Yeah, I was like 19 years old, and I didn't know what to do with it. So they said we'd pay you $5,000 to shut it down and give us the domain. So I did that. It was a big mistake because there was no eBay.
Well,
so I made another mistake.
That was like your first exit from your first venture, right?
Right.
A $5,000 exit, right?
$5,000 exit for trade. Basically, I was infringing their trademarks.
That's right. So that was your first exit, right?
Yeah.
I know you've been involved in lots of ventures. Do you remember when you got out of law school, what was the first venture that you actually did, where you entrepreneured? And I know you practiced law for a while when you got out.
Yeah. Well, I've done like lots and lots of companies that have failed and different ways.
I want to ask you about that too.
So after I did the failure of AOLclassifieds.com, I decided to create another company called Mac Insider. So people that are familiar with Macs today in the 90s will still remember Mac
Really?
Insider.
Yeah.
We were one of the biggest news publications on the web for the Mac industry. So I created Mac Insider inside of my dad's store. We always knew when the latest price drops were going to be. So we would post, we'd have these big bug reports, and we created a website which would kind of indicate what's happening in the Apple industry. And it's kind of an entertaining, journalistic style. It was basically a blog before there were blogs.
That's right.
And then Apple caught on that it was actually the Apple, one of their big Apple dealers' son that's created this site. So it's still 20 years old, and Apple sent us some scary things. So I ended up merging that business with Ziff Davis. Ziff Davis had something called Mac Week.
I know about that.
And so Mac Week, Mac Insider, our journalistic team got merged into that, and it became an online daily. So that was that, but didn't make any money from that either. So I had these little web projects that didn't really get very far.
But it's all experience. What were you learning from these failures? Any one big lesson?
Well, just don't give up.
Don't never give up, right?
Never give up, and never lose hope, and never let disappointment and people who say bad things about you keep trying. Keep trying. So I kept trying new things. You know.
Find a way, right?
Find a way, yeah.
Find a way around it, right?
Yeah.
I've heard that before. You know, so this is a good consistent theme.
Yeah.
I like
and then
that.
Like around 99, I graduated with my engineering degree only because our business was going down the tubes. Apple was taking away
you had to reinvent
dealerships.
yourself, basically.
Right. So then I started focusing in on my engineering school. I did really well my last. I stopped working at my dad's store, so I didn't really do anything in there. And that business went bankrupt though. And then, so when it went bankrupt, then I had to like find a way to survive.
How did you get up to the Valley after that? Did you go to where'd you go to law school? Down in Arizona?
I got into the MBA JD program
at
Arizona State, and I did that when I was 21 years old. So I'd already had 2 internet companies, and so my application, and I did really well on the GMAT because, you know, I had a liberal arts at least training from my dad's store, and then I had a very solid math and science training. So I guess I did very well on the GMAT, and they figured, you know, they can bypass the 5-year working requirement because I got this high GMAT score, and they figured he's got some real internet experience. So I got this Pepsi Cola scholarship. So because I didn't have any money, and so the CEO of Pepsi Cola had gone to Arizona State Business School. So I got a Pepsi Cola scholarship, and I got full tuition and stipend to go to business school.
Wow, that's great. So you get through business school, you get through law school.
I did my first year of business school. The December break, I didn't have much going. I didn't have a place to live, so I was living in my friend's house. Because our Arizona, they'd taken away everything. They'd taken away our cars. I mean, we had my parents. It was a very depressing place. They decided I'm gonna like live with my friend, and so my friend like, you know, what do we do, you know, in this break? So let's study for the LSAT, because it seems like lawyers they are the ones that are screwing over my dad, like everyone else, and then you know, they seem to have all the power. I said, well, we don't know anything because we're both engineers. We don't know anything about law, but let's try to take the LSAT. So it's on a whim. We decided we're going to try to take the LSAT, and so we took the LSAT. And I remember the first this is 1999 December. I studied for it with him, and I did really poorly. So I did really poorly, and I figured, oh my God, this is like. I'm used to doing pretty well, but this is different. And I didn't do so well. And then we both studied together, and then the last day, we weren't doing very well before having to go to Phoenix College the next day to take it. And then we went to go take it, and he didn't show up. So he didn't show up for the LSAT, and I was stuck there taking the test.
So you get through law school.
Got into law school.
And you get through law school.
Arizona State. Went to the Arizona State law
How'd you
school.
get up to the Valley? How'd you get into?
So I had gotten, because my father's store, so I used to come to Cupertino all the time growing up because of the history with Apple. And my father became the 5th. We grew. So starting from that garage doing Rolodex sorting in the early 80s, we'd gone to become the 5th largest Apple dealership in the whole country.
Wow, that's
so
pretty
we were
impressive.
one of the largest Indian-owned businesses in America.
That's impressive.
Indian-American-owned businesses, and we were an Apple specialist. So we're in the one of the largest Apple distributors. So we had 60% of the school business, and I was the operations manager in Arizona and Southern California, a Computers Plus company. And so basically, you know, we had gotten to be this pretty big business, so we used to come to the Valley all the time. And HP, which is a company that we resold mostly their Apple desk writer printers.
Yeah, I remember that.
And, you know, because once I graduated from engineering school, I first went to Lockheed Martin, but through my connections with my father's store, I convinced HP to like, you know, that I wanted to work in the computer industry because that's what I knew about.
Right.
And I said, you know, can I get a job at HP? So I got a job in Palo Alto in the strategic planning and modeling group of HP, which is in the corporate headquarters. Yeah. And that strategic planning and modeling group is the HP think tank. So it's a corporate think tank for all of HP.
But were you a lawyer by then too?
No, I was an engineer.
You were still an engineer?
Yeah.
And where'd you go to law school? In Arizona?
I had to go to, so HP paid for helping me in the summers with a salary and then during the school year.
Right.
So I went back to Arizona. So that second year, so my first year I did MBA, second year I did JD because I was in the JD program. So in September 1999, I started my JD. And then I finished the first year of JD in May 2000. May 2000. And still working for HP the whole time. Became a patent agent, so I started to work with HP strategic planning.
But you know, that was about the dot-com bust around May 2000, August 2000.
Yeah, so in May 2000.
But were you affected by that at all, by the dot-com bust?
A little bit. I mean, you know, just because I was an engineer, but I mostly had now switched gears. I still wanted to be part of the dot-com boom, so I wanted to get back to Silicon Valley, and I didn't like law school. I didn't do that well in it, actually, the first semester. And then the second semester did better, but I felt I wasn't the right fit for this place. So I decided I'm going to come back to Silicon Valley. Right. I didn't have any money either. So I decided I'm going to come back to Silicon Valley and work for HP full time. So I left law school. I dropped out of law school after my first year and drove back to work for HP and do engineering.
But eventually you went back to law school.
Went back to law school in 2003, January 2003, when I worked at Juniper Networks, which basically all the HP people went to go work.
I remember Juniper too.
And I became the director of supply chain for Juniper. I was only 20, you know. 20s, right? I was still 27 years old. I was a senior manager at Juniper because I saw the company grow from 100 million to $1 billion. Right. You know, and so, but then when that downturn happened, I didn't have a job again, couldn't find a job. I was too young for really management positions, it seemed, and you know, there was no good jobs for networking.
So I want to jump ahead for a minute. So let's say you graduate law school, you get back to the Valley.
So I got back to Jolly. Once I went back to law school, I was already married. So while I was out of law school, if the 2002 crash didn't happen, I wouldn't have ever gone back to law school. Right. And so basically, when I went back to law school, my wife and I moved there. She supported me for a year because otherwise I'd like no money again. Right. And then I got a job that summer at a very big Silicon Valley law firm. Right. Blakely Sokoloff. So summer of 2003, I got really lucky with this great law firm that represents Apple and like Intel and all these
so you learned all sorts of stuff there, right?
Yeah, so I got a summer internship and I got a full-time offer.
What was your first startup after that, after you came back to Silicon? Do you remember? Okay.
Yeah, so once I got to Blakely, I had this billing requirement. So the summer was fun. I just was focused in lawyer mode. Once I graduated, I mean, I couldn't really have any, I had to focus on legal work, because there's just so much to do and so much to learn. So in 2004, I worked at Blakely. I didn't really do anything other than
So you really did focus on law, right?
Yeah, I had to focus on law because I had to, you know, kind of establish
myself. That had implications for your later career to really learn the trademark business, the patent business.
So 2004, most of 2005, I primarily focused on being a patent attorney, writing patent applications for big companies.
And you learned that, right? You learned how to do it, right?
Right, learn how to do it well and learn how to do it well with a big law firm, the fourth largest patent law firm in the country. And with a really good mentor. So I spent a lot of time learning my trade, at least a couple of years.
But you had to, right?
Yeah, I had to. And then after that, I pretty much had to leave because it wasn't a good fit. I wasn't making my billable hours. Yeah, I started getting my entrepreneurial bug back. And
I mean, the personality, there's a difference between being a lawyer and although as your career evolved, you've been able to weave your legal interest in the legal system and delivery of legal services with your entrepreneurial drive.
Right,
which I think that's what's interesting
about
your
So I felt like
career.
I was losing my soul because I was just basically, I had this office at Blakely, the door would close and I got fed like a rat, a bunch of files.
Yeah, every day, right?
And like big, huge folders. And
every day.
I had to organize these folders. Nothing was scanned. I go to the file room to get stuff scanned. I had a secretary who made like 80 grand a year. I had a huge salary. In 2000, 2004, I had, 29 years old, had $130,000 a year salary.
Yeah, it's great.
Pretty good salary.
It's great.
But then all of a sudden, like I see all this inefficiency, and I'm just getting this fed work all the time. Anytime my phone rings, first of all, you're not supposed to talk to clients. You're supposed to direct them to a partner.
Right.
You're not supposed to talk in the hallway. It just was like soul sucking.
Well, you're being in a factory. You're in a high-priced factory, basically, right? So what was your first startup after this phase?
So I decided I wanted to go back to engineering school. Yeah. So I decided, I need to get out of this, even though like I have all my life needs finally met. Right. I have like a secure job. Right. And everything is
But you're
stable,
still actually finding yourself at this point.
But I just can't survive here. I just, and I just couldn't focus on stuff after a while. So I decided I wanted to be an engineer again. So I got into the graduate school of engineering at Stanford, and I decided to try that and try to do that, and also try to figure out what I like, right? Right. And I started getting back. I decided what I liked was web. I like to actually build database-driven sites, and I like government data.
You had ideas about this too,
yeah,
right?
And I had ideas about taking government data and making it more interesting and relevant and social. And,
and accessible, right?
Accessible. So, because you had all this data that was being released by the government, and I thought it'd be really neat to make the white pages come alive by putting them on a map and seeing who wrote them.
Right. Actually harks back to some early experience that you had, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when did you start trademarking?
So I did that venture. First was Fat Door. So I created Fat Door at Stanford. Is invested in it by Stanford. Is invested by Stanford professors. Spun out of Stanford. Raised 2 rounds of funding. Right. Raised $7 million in our last round. Got fired as the CEO. Right. And then when I got fired as the CEO in 2007, late 2007, early 2008, I decided I needed to do something else. Right. But this time, unlike Fat Door, which didn't have a revenue model, even though we had all this venture funding, we had bought a car with the license plate Fat Door and did all this stupid Silicon Valley things. Right. I didn't have a revenue model. So then you had this big board of directors telling you what to do, and it was really tough. So I decided, this time I'm going to create something that has a revenue model first, right? So
before you get to that,
do
you have any suggestions about growing a company organically, internally, or going for outside funding? Do you have a point of view about that?
Yeah, so my point of view is until you have financial security, your focus should be on creating financial security for yourself. Because,
for yourself?
Yeah, and through a company that has a revenue model on its own.
The real revenue?
Yes.
Which you grow organically?
You grow organically because this way you don't have to be, your stress level goes down. You have control over the projects you do.
You have control,
yeah.
Right.
Because unless you meet the expectations, when you take outside money, usually they want to exit. The first thing they would do is they think, how are we going to exit this investment? Right. And they have limited patience with R&D.
And it takes time.
Right. And so if you like experimentation and doing R&D, it's very hard to do that unless when you have outside capital. So ideally, you figured something out that now you need this money to scale with, and what you figured out has a clear monetization already.
Trademarky is one of the most trafficked legal sites on the web today.
That's right.
And tell us a little bit about that, and how you got that idea, and how you drove that internally.
Yeah, so the first thing was just taking databases. So my advisor at Stanford is Raj V, and he had learned a lot about databases from him, and I speaking to him, and he said, Raj, why don't you do something in the legal space? Because it seems like you're this odd engineering student anywhere, because you were this engineer student, you know something about law. So I said, okay, I'm going to look for data sets that haven't been indexed by Google. So Rajiv Modwani is the first investor in Google, and he also was an advisor to Sergey Brin and Larry Page. So I had this inspiring mentor in Rajiv Modwani, and he basically said, you should create something that will allow Google to find you rather than you having to go find customers.
That's right.
So where can you get data sets that aren't indexed? So in the legal space. So I started looking at different data sets. And we made some iterations, and I found that, wow, brands are really interesting. Brands are social because people follow brands. People follow Apple. People follow Facebook. People follow J-Lo. People follow the SF giants. And so brands are inherently interesting. Now, can you take something that's inherently interesting, and what is a trademark is a dry rendition of something that's inherently interesting. So from an average person's view, a trademark is a brand. It's something that people follow, especially when they get passionate about. And there's a subset of brands that have high customer loyalty, or user loyalty. And so, that whole brand data, it seems, as the way it's protected, is in the form of trademarks. And that trademarks, the data for trademarks, I discovered, was never indexed by Google.
But it's also in the public domain, right?
It's in the public domain.
So you get this insight to figure out a way to make it more accessible to people?
Yeah, and make it more accessible to crawlers. So my first customer is the Google search engine, the Bing search engine, the Yahoo search engine. How do I make this data that the government has
that's really creative.
More accessible to my first customer? My
Google.
First customer is search engines.
Right.
So they have a problem. They like to index interesting information. They can't get to this information because of n number of reasons. It's not structured the right way.
It's structured. It's in a closed database.
The URLs aren't a fixed URL. There's no way to access the site links. And the government has no interest in publicizing trademarks. So I figure, okay, my first customer, so how do I make this site work for Google and work for Yahoo?
Okay, so now you achieve this, and then this gets translated into a hugely visited site because it gets visibility in the engines, right?
Right. So
but then you go ahead and back it up with a legal service, right?
Right, exactly.
So
I first get it in the engines, and by getting in the engines, I now have it be social. So basically, to get it in the engines, you want to get inbound links from high-quality sites.
Right.
So you want people to link back to you. So what I decided to do is find, ways to subscribe people that follow things or get them to subscribe. So if someone's writing about Apple, reach out to that journalist, tell them, look, here's a brand history of Apple. Why don't you subscribe?
Meanwhile, you're bootstrapping this whole thing. You get a couple of partners, you build a database, but you're basically building this with no capital, right?
No capital, yeah.
You're just doing this with your own...
Me and two people.
Using your own... This is interesting because you're building it from your own creativity, your own insights, your own skill, with some colleagues which have similar sets of skills.
Right.
And then it grows till it's a multi-million-dollar business out of nothing, right?
That's right. And so we figured, we're getting all this traffic, then like, how do we make this traffic monetized? And then, ultimately, we had, in the early stages of trade market, we had Sequoia Capital interested, we had the investors in Yelp interested, Bessemer Ventures, because we'd basically create a brand search engine.
Right.
And brands, we made them rating and review. We made it a ratings and review site. People can rate and review products and services of old. So then we figured, how do we create a revenue model so we don't have to depend upon these same VCs that fired me last time? And so, the chances of me taking their money and not having a revenue, I'll probably get fired again.
Right.
So, and plus, they're already skeptical because you have this one shot at glory, and if you you're washed up. You're like the entrepreneur they invested in.
Yeah, so you're already dead meat already. They're not going to look at you, right?
Not seriously. I don't have a track record for success.
Right. So so you build a law firm around this with a branch in India because you have those contacts, and figure out a way to do a low-cost trademark service for what I call the latent market for legal service.
First, we didn't do it in India. First,
you did it right here.
I hired it right here. So I hired this guy, Chris Didico. He just graduated law school. He wanted to do IP, but didn't have any good opportunities. Right. So I paid him $9 an hour, right? I said, look, I built this site. I know you want to do trademarks, $9 an hour. You don't need to go to law school to finish it. I went to Hastings Law School. But he took that. I said, if we get any billable work out of this, you can do it for $40 an hour, and you can focus on trademarks. Right. Chris Didico became the second largest trademark filing attorney 2 years later and got a $200,000 job at a major cosmetics company. 2 years out of law school, and I trained him and mentored him, and so that was really satisfying. But initially, Chris Didico did all the trademarks, and then we hired more people. But that did not scale. I learned the hard way. You can't pay lawyers $9 an hour and then keep them happy because they'll be like, why did I go to law school?
So you had to figure out another strategy to scale it, right? So you had to scale it in some ways, right?
Yeah, how to scale it while keeping the costs low. So the way to scale it without keeping the costs low and having a whole bunch of new lawyers hate me, right? To basically create a globalized structure that would allow us to keep the costs low and compete with the non-legal entities.
Correct.
While still servicing that market demand.
So you developed an outsourcing strategy, essentially.
Yeah, insourcing.
Insourcing, because everybody worked for you. But you
me,
distributed the workforce wherever you can get really low cost.
Yeah.
So then...
Still found attorneys that are reviewed by U.S. attorneys. And this way I don't have a bunch of new attorneys. So I always said, look, I'm giving you experience. Like, I'm giving you experience. I can't afford to pay you for it because my competition doesn't hire lawyers. I'm hiring lawyers. My competition doesn't hire lawyers. And in fact, you can make your own future here because you get direct client engagement. And that didn't work for all new law students.
So you become actually a low-cost provider and become a dominant provider of trademarks to small business really nationwide or globally. Yeah. This then leads to, I know a little bit about this legal force concept that you've now come up with. Tell us about legal force a little bit and your vision of legal services on a global scale.
Yeah, so our first full year in trademark, when we launched it, we did 4,000 trademarks, which is twice as many as the largest law firms in the country. The next year we did 8,000. The next year we did 12,000. We did 15,000. This year we'll probably do about 18,000.
Yeah, that's good.
So now we've done more trademark filings than any law firm in the history of the United States. We've got all these customers, which are our clients. So they're not really customers like they are for legal, they're clients of our law
clients,
firm.
Right.
But unfortunately, these clients, they come in all shapes and sizes. We've got celebrities. We've got big movie studio. We've got all kinds of really famous people, big corporations, to all the way to the first-time entrepreneur. Now, and they're all over the world. And now, how do I service them?
How do you take it to
how do they see
it to the next level, right?
And how do you take that? How do they start seeing us not as a website, but as a law firm? Because right now they see us we're starting to see us as a website. So what we decided to do is create a physical, presence to show the world that we're not just another legal.
But you're a real law firm,
we're actually a real law firm. There's real lawyers.
Right.
So we create a physical presence, and it was very expensive to build this store we're in now, but it's paid off because my sales this year, it hasn't paid off if I compare how many people have walked in the store and done anything.
Right.
My global brand has transformed. And our sales this year are 30% over last year. And I can't attribute that to anything. I can only attribute 10% of that to repeat customers. I can attribute maybe 5% of it to increased spending on because we do have a paid search spend. But there is still another 15%, which is unknown. And all I can attribute to is the goodwill we've created with the store.
Yeah, because you have this beautiful physical presence which invites people in to explore their alternatives and their startup ideas, right? So this has really begun to reinforce this concept, this really creating a branded legal service, which is a worldwide legal service, right?
So even if you're in Knoxville, Tennessee, you suddenly know that when you're dealing with legal force trade market, you're dealing with a place that's accessible. It's changing the legal profession. Then we're also starting to build a network of lawyers. So we've attracted like 5 lawyers in different places that have taken on our brand.
Right.
And they basically, we've discovered over time, the best ones that work out for them and for us are patent attorneys.
Right.
Because patent attorneys is a natural complementary skill to trademark law.
And it's a core skill. You don't become a patent attorney so easily. So there's really high competence in that role, right?
Right.
And then that becomes sticky in a way.
Yeah. So patent attorneys, solo patent attorneys, say they're in Denver, I can give them 50 clients to manage, and they can go meet with them.
I call that creating what we call a branded network, except it's a branded network of patent attorneys. That's interesting. Tell me about your vision about what's wrong with the delivery of legal service, particularly to small businesses, which is, I think, some component of your existing client base. How is it broken, and how do you plan to fix it?
Well, I think that they don't have access to knowledge as well as they should in the fidelity they need. I think one of the opportunities, and we're starting this now, is next week, when we've been doing events at the store, but now we're going to start a podcast series. So every lawyer in our firm that works in our firm is going to be required to do a client podcast.
So you're saying that this group of people are really underserved. It's an underserved clientele.
Exactly. So I have now 34,000 clients all over the world.
Right.
And so these 34 clients, 30,000, one of the benefits of using Trade Market is now you also get to be on a podcast series.
Right.
So you get invited to a podcast that our attorneys will give to our own clients, no one else, just our own clients, every week about tips about how they can run their business.
Now, this is a clientele that's not really served by the large law firms, right?
Not for the most part, no. I would say 70% of them are people that would go to LegalZoom or Rocketware or not do anything at all.
Yeah, but you're providing a true legal service at a cost which is really affordable.
Right.
So you're opening up a whole new market. It kind of reminds me a little bit about Southwest Airlines. When they first started serving, they were competing by targeting their service to people who took the bus at a price which they could afford.
Right.
And so they went after the people who were unserved. Now they're the biggest airline in the United States because they went after a latent market. Is that a way of thinking about it?
It is. And opening up the market, because you have these individuals, these small businesses, they're like my father, they're facing difficulty in contracts.
And they can't get the advice and the quality.
They can't get the advice, and they don't even
Right.
know where to turn, and they won't necessarily turn anywhere because they don't have they don't know where to go. But if they know that this is a law firm that helps them, and here's a weekly podcast that might be relevant to them,
That's great.
then they can like tune in and get knowledge.
Okay, so we're about at the end of this interview. Do you want to say anything else to summarize one little quick statement about advice for lawyers who want to become entrepreneurs? Do you think there's
never stop learning and never fear things that you don't know, especially when they're technical and things that are. You need to work with other types of people. So diversity is very important. When I say diversity, it's not just cultural diversity, but it's really mindset, educational diversity. So if you can surround yourself with people that have a totally different educational background
you learn from that, right?
You learn from that, and you can integrate that. And if you can bring a bunch of people with different skill sets together and inspire by something.
One last question. Do you think the legal industry is ripe for disruption in the kind of ways that you've moved into it? Do you think we're going to have a very different kind of legal delivery system in the next decade or so?
Yeah, I think it's already happening. I think one of the opportunities are for new lawyers to make their own future. There's this green field of opportunities.
Right.
And
that's great.
They should think creatively, think cross-functionally.
Think different.
Yeah. Think different.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Good luck.
Okay,
Good luck.
you.